Hello, Celtics fans. Of course, many of us had really lofty expectations for the 2018-19 Boston Celtics going into the season, and they ended up as a 49-win team, the 4 seed, and they'll be going up against the Indiana Pacers starting tomorrow. So, what do I really think about this? Honestly, obviously, this was not the dream season we all had in mind. A lot of people, kind of just took last year and thought, they didn't have Kyrie and Hayward at the end of the season, so if you add them, they're going to win like 20 more games or whatever. And you certainly wouldn't be wrong to think that, but, like I've said, and I think I even said this at the beginning when I kind of previewed the season, things don't always work out the way you think, but at the same time, this was a disappointment. There's no other way to say it. And really, the first and only disappointment so far in the Brad Stevens era. I've always felt that he got the most he could out of his team, no matter what happened, even when he had the injury to Hayward. And, that would have, kind of knocked out a lot of teams, but they still won 55 games last year with the team they had. He kept it together. He got them to the Eastern Conference Finals. I can remember last year at this time saying, the Celtics are screwed because they don't have Kyrie and they're not going to make it out of the first round in the playoffs, and sure enough, they pushed the Cleveland Cavaliers to 7 games, the defending Eastern Conference champions at the time. They pushed them to 7 games, probably should have won that game. They just had a really bad showing at Boston Garden, and, they were 1 game away from the finals last year with a team that was basically led by rookies and, some backup players like Terry Rozier. So, they really overachieved last year in terms of the playoffs. And this year, not so great. And it's not even that they won, the number of games they won. People thought they'd win 60 games. Maybe that was a bit much. It wasn't even the win total. It was just the teams that they lost to and some of the stretches that they had where you never really had that feeling. They never, ran off 18 out of 20 games or something, like a big winning streak. They'd win 5 in a row, and they'd lose a couple, and win another 5 in a row, lose a few. They never really seemed to get on a really big roll. And they had those statement games, like when they blew out the Warriors in Golden State. I know the Warriors didn't have their entire team, but still they beat them by 25, and they played a close game against them in Boston. They beat the Rockets, they beat, they've shown that they can beat these playoff contending teams. They beat Philadelphia in Philadelphia in a really close game. They almost beat Milwaukee in Milwaukee. That's going to be a big opponent for them. They, at least stuck with them. So, you look at these teams that they're going to see in the playoffs, and I don't look at them and say, there's no way they can beat them. But I also don't feel like they're, what they were supposed to be, which is one of the top 2 teams in the league with Toronto. Now, I don't think anybody saw Milwaukee being as good as they were. I thought, the top 4, which ended up being what it was, I thought the top 4 would be, maybe Toronto, Boston, Philly, and Milwaukee. I thought maybe in that order. I thought because of Toronto adding Kawhi Leonard, and Toronto's always a pretty good regular season team, and for whatever reason they match up well with the Celtics. They seem to beat them more often than not. So I thought that Toronto would be on top of the conference. Turns out Milwaukee was. And because of that, because you had to deal with, the Sixers taking another step forward, the Celtics got knocked down to 4. So part of it is, that your competition got better, but it's also, it's discouraging in a way because for years now, watching this rebuild, and it has been a fascinating rebuild, it has been a fun to watch rebuild, but the whole time, no matter how good the Celtics seem to get, they could never get past Cleveland. The Cleveland Cavaliers were always that bully at the end of the hallway, just waiting to push you down. It didn't matter what you did or how well you did in the season, LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers were going to beat you eventually. And they did, and that was the whole thing. You just couldn't get past them. Even last year, it took them to 7 games, you just couldn't quite make it. And then, LeBron leaves the Eastern Conference. The Cavaliers are a non-factor. You got Kyrie Irving, you got Gordon Hayward and Horford and everybody. The rookies taking another step forward. So you're thinking, this is going to be a really great team. You don't have Cleveland anymore. Now you're Cleveland. You're the team that's going to push everybody around. And it doesn't really work that way. And I think part of that is kind of the attitude of the team. They don't really seem to have that mentality. Maybe it's because they've spent the last 3 or 4 years being, kind of that second or third best team where it's like, okay, we're good, but we're not Cleveland. And they're not really ready to be Cleveland, like the old Cleveland. They're not ready to be, that team. And to their benefit, neither are any of these other teams. The Pacers, the Bucks, all these other teams have never really been in this position of title contention. And now one of these teams, by default, is going to make it to the NBA Finals, you would think. One of these top 4 or 5 teams in the Eastern Conference. I don't think the Pacers will, and I'm not sure the Celtics will either. But one of these top teams is going to make it to the finals, and it's going to be a situation that they've never been in because, for the last, 4 or 5 years, it's been Cleveland. And then before that, it was the Miami Heat with LeBron. So it's always been LeBron going to the finals. That's not going to happen this time. So one of these teams, Milwaukee, Toronto, Boston, someone's going to have to make a statement. Out of all those teams, I actually have the least faith in the Sixers, just because they are still kind of young. They almost remind me of the Celtics from a couple of years ago. Their whole rebuild cycle has been like a couple of years behind the Celtics. I actually think they have better players. I mean, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons and company, I think, are actually better than Tatum and Brown. I don't think that's a stretch to say. The Celtics don't have a player as good as Joel Embiid, but that said, they have more experienced players. They have Kyrie Irving than they have, I don't know, for whatever reason, they have the Sixers number, and I feel like Toronto could beat the Sixers. I feel like even the Bucks could beat the Sixers. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised to see, the Sixers could go as far as the Eastern Conference Finals, but I don't think they're going to go to the Finals. I think the best bet is going to be either the Bucks or the Raptors in the Finals. I think Kawhi Leonard really gives Toronto a different dimension that they didn't have in years past, and now that they don't have to play LeBron, I think they finally win a couple rounds in the playoffs and they get there. And now because you are the 4 seed, the Celtics, you will have to play Milwaukee in that second round, assuming, Milwaukee doesn't get upset by the 8 seed, which I don't see happening. I don't think anybody sees that happening. So, assuming they beat the Pacers, which I think they will, but that's not a given. They played some tough games with the Pacers. I believe they won the season series, but it was close. So, what do I think of the Celtics' chances? I think, unfortunately, they do lose in the second round. I just think the Bucks will beat them because of the home court advantage, not necessarily because the Bucks are this juggernaut, because, like I said, there really isn't a juggernaut in the Eastern Conference right now. The whole structure has been kind of revamped because of Cleveland leaving. Obviously, as a Celtics fan, I wanted to see the Celtics take that role, but they weren't ready, and, we'll see if these other teams are ready, but playoffs are starting. I guess the regular season is what it is. I could really get into, breaking down like Gordon Hayward and some of the disappointments this season, but it is what it is. Like I said, the playoffs are what's going to matter. We're not going to remember, if the Celtics do somehow make this miraculous run to the finals, we're not going to remember that they only won 49 games as opposed to 60 games. Like, we're not going to remember that. Same thing if they get knocked out in the second round, it's not going to be because of Gordon Hayward having a bad game in October. Like, it's just, it's whatever. So a lot of these things that happened, they already happened. They lost to some crappy teams. They had bad defense at times. But if they can get it together for the next month or two, that's what's going to matter. So let's see what happens. Let's go Celtics. I've been wrong before. Last year I thought they were going to just be a complete failure. So let's see what happens here. I think this is like year 5 of the rebuild, or the Brad Stevens experiment, if you will. And this is, arguably supposed to be the best team he's had, and they kind of had the worst results based on the expectations. So we'll see what happens. I still say the Celtics don't make it out of the second round. If I'm wrong, I will make a video about it. Either way, I'll make a video whenever they're eliminated, however it happens. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, let's go Celtics.